This section is going to focus on the actual physiology of breathing. And before we jump into that, I want you to think about the words respiration and inspiration. The root of the word, of both words, is actually spir, which means, or is Latin for breathe. That said, the term inspiration comes from the Latin word inspiritus, which means to breathe into and inspire. And if you think about the word inspire, it means give life to an idea or create an idea. When you inspire someone, you encourage them to be bigger and better, which is a fascinating, at least in my mind, use of the term and the derivation of the word. I'm going to go to share screen now, and we're going to jump into the PowerPoint. Oops, this is one. Now, the function of the respiratory system, we know, is to supply cells with oxygen and to remove carbon dioxide. Three basic processes are involved: pulmonary ventilation, external respiration, and internal respiration. When you talk about pulmonary ventilation, we're talking about breathing, and that will encompass both inspiration and expiration. Super Khan Academy video on this. Watch that. Inspiration, also known as inhalation, means breathing air in. The force that is necessary is atmospheric pressure. Now think about the diaphragm at rest. It is relaxed and it is curved upward. The air pressure outside the lungs is going to be equal to the air pressure inside the lung at about 1 atmosphere. We know that the thoracic cavity, when it is at rest, because the two major sets of muscles that are associated with breathing, which will be the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, are at rest. You do need to know about Boyle's law, which discusses the relationship between the pressure and the volume of a gas. If you have gases in a container, if you reduce the container size, you will increase pressure. So, in short, pressure is going to vary inversely with volume. And the diagram on the next slide here shows you that if you have a set volume, like the diagram on the left, you have a certain amount of material or gas in a volume. You haven't changed the temperature. You have a pressure of 1. Take a look at what happens on the right. You are decreasing the volume, so you are increasing the pressure. Temperature remains the same. It is as simple as that. So when you decrease the volume, you increase the pressure. When you increase the volume, you decrease the pressure. And that should be pretty straightforward. We already talked about concepts like that. So during inspiration, the diaphragm contracts and flattens, which means the size of the thoracic cavity will increase. At the same time the diaphragm is flattening because it is contracting, the intercostal muscles are contracting and bringing the ribs up and out. Think bucket handle movement, both of which will increase the size of the thoracic cavity. Because the size of the thoracic cavity is going to increase, the pressure in the thoracic cavity is going to decrease, which means that the pressure outside the lungs is going to be greater than the pressure inside the lungs, which means that air will rush into the lungs to equalize that pressure gradient. So let's go over that again. Put down your pen or your pencil and stop and think about this. intercostal muscles, the external intercostals, are at rest. Diaphragm is at rest. When the diaphragm is at rest, it is arched, sort of over the liver and the spleen and the stomach. You need to breathe in. The intercostal muscles contract, which bring the ribs up and out like a bucket handle. The diaphragm contracts and flattens. Both of those activities will increase the size of the thoracic cavity. That means the volume in the lungs will be greater, which means that the pressure in the lungs will drop. Because the pressure in the atmosphere is now greater than the pressure in the lungs, the air will rush in to equalize that pressure gradient. Now, the pleural membranes are going to play a role in inspiration. We know that the serous fluid in between pleural membranes is mostly water. Water in serous fluid has a fairly high surface tension. And when you talk about the pleural membranes, that is going to make those pleural membranes move together. So when the thoracic cavity expands because the intercostal muscles are contracting and the ribs are moving up and out, the parietal pleura, which is attached to the inside of the thoracic cavity, is going to be pulled up and out with the ribs, which means that because the pleural membranes move like a unit, the visceral pleura will also expand, which means the lungs will expand. So once again, this means that when you're inspiring, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. As it increases, the pressure decreases and air will rush in. And that is the role the pleural membranes play. Please remember that the two major muscles of respiration are going to be the external intercostals and the diaphragm. And when you're talking about the external intercostal muscles, they're going to make those ribs move up and out, again, like a bucket handle. And the pleural membranes are going to move with those ribs. Now, expiration is mostly a passive function. It is going to depend on two factors. The elastic recoil of tissues that were stretched out during inspiration will kind of collapse on themselves. And in addition to that, you're going to have surface tension on the alveolar walls, and the inward pull of that surface tension due to the alveolar fluid will also help, in quotes, collapse the lungs. Now, at the end of an expiration, because of that surface tension and the fluid in the alveoli, they sort of tend to recoil inward and kind of collapse on themselves. You need the compound surfactant, which is a detergent-like substance, which is made of phospholipids and proteins, to help decrease the surface tension of that fluid. As the alveoli become smaller during expiration, that surfactant overrides that pressure differentiation and allows the alveoli to remain inflated. That surfactant becomes super important. Now, if you have a pneumothorax, the air in the pleural cavity is going to start to do funky stuff because of either a wound in the parietal membrane or a rupture of the visceral pleura. It is going to be treated by removing air with chest tubes. The pleura heal and the lung can reinflate. A little bit more on surfactant and surface tension. Great little video there. Fetuses are going to begin to produce surfactant between weeks 24 and 28. By the time they are 35 weeks old in utero, most are going to have enough surfactant that they are producing themselves in order to keep the alveoli from collapsing. if you have insufficient quantity of surfactant in a premature infant, a poor little tyke will have infant respiratory distress syndrome because the alveoli are collapsing upon each breath. The next series of slides shows you what is happening with the process of inspiration and expiration. And I will let you go through that on your own time, and we can discuss any questions that you have when we are in class.